Let's go through some of my all-time favorite, most useful Blender extensions. Now, there are a number of extensions that come with Blender. When I say they come with Blender, I mean they're downloadable from Blender's extensions library. Blender does a smart thing where it doesn't automatically enable every extension that's available, just because that would make Blender open up slower and it would be a larger file and all of that stuff we don't really want. So instead, there's a smart solution where Blender now communicates online to find the extension library. It gets automatic updates. You can install new extensions very quickly. And this is a relatively new feature to Blender. Add-ons are obviously not new, but this new unified extension library is a new development. So to get there, just go to extensions.blender.org. If you find an extension that you like, so for example, non-destructive modeling toolkit. This isn't one I've used, so it won't be on our list, but let me just show you how to install it. All you have to do is come down to Get Add-on, and then you can drag and drop this literally just into Blender, which is really cool. So drag and drop, and just like that, it's checking for updates, it's installing it, and it'll ask you if you want to enable it. So just like that, that extension is installed. So that's one way you can do it. Another way is you could just go to Edit and Preferences. You can go to Get Extensions and you can search for whatever you need here, or you can scroll through and find some new extensions. Okay, so let's go through a few of my favorite. The first one is a must-have in my opinion. It's called Booltron. Now there's another Boolean tool extension called Booltools, which is also very, very useful. I prefer Booltron because I find the results to be a little bit faster, a little bit more consistent. So after you get that extension, let's just see how it compares to a typical Boolean workflow. So in Blender with a Boolean, let's just do a very simple example of two cubes here. What we would typically do is select our object we want to cut out of or add to or whatever. We go to modifiers, we add a Boolean modifier, then we select our object. And now we have this cube cutting into this one. Two things that I don't love. Number one is this cube is still in the way, so we can't actually see what's happening here. Number two is this isn't necessarily applied. So if we move this cube around, now this is, depending on how you look at it, it's a pro and con. But I want the flexibility just to automatically cut out, and for this to be finalized mesh, I would have to apply the modifier, and now this is a mesh that we can actually work with. So let's back up and let's see how Booltron would handle this. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is select two objects. Now the object that's active, we've gone over this in my Blender tutorials, it's important that that one you understand is the one that this operation is going to be happening on. So we'll select these two. The last one is active. This is the one that's going to get cut out. Now to find the Booltron options, just go to the end panel where many Blender add-ons end up. And let's just scroll down until we find Booltron. And now we have some cool options here. We have destructive Booleans and non-destructive, which is very, very useful. First of all, let's just do a destructive difference. Click on that and boom, just like that, this has been applied. It's ready to go. I can keep modeling without fumbling through modifiers and applying them and doing all of that. We also have a non-destructive option if I do want to have this non-destructive. You'll notice that took care of one of my big pet peeves is I clicked that and it made the visibility on this second object or the cutting object, it set it to wireframe. So automatically it's out of the way and I can see what this is doing here. As I move it around, it's non-destructive. We can continue to work with this. So that's cool. You'll notice this is not your standard Boolean modifier here. The cool thing about this is it has not only some more options, but I find this to be a little bit more consistent and useful than Blender's Boolean modifier. So let me show you an example of that. Very quickly though, let's just go here where you can bake the modifier. So let me just save our blend file here and let's bake the modifier. Now this is similar to applying the modifier, but it's not officially applied. If you go to edit mode, you can still see this is just a cube and we can actually delete that bake and bake a different one. So this is kind of an in-between step between applying something and having it destructive and having it non-destructive. So I particularly like this. Now you could still You don't need to use this. You don't need to bake it. You could still come here and apply the modifier just with Control A. And if we delete that, this has been applied. So that's just kind of a interesting, cool thing that I liked about this. The fact that we can bake the results without applying them. Also has some nice little shortcuts here. For example, if we did a non-destructive difference, we could, well, let me select those in the right order. We could just select this object very quickly, or we could dismiss this, which basically just gets rid of the modifier, which is just a really useful shortcut here. Okay, but let's look at a more complex example. Let's grab Suzanne maybe. Let's rotate face down, place her face in the cube here. And this is a bit more of a complex example. So let's just do the typical Blender Boolean. Let's select Suzanne as the object. And that looks like it's cutting into this nicely. However, we do have, let's find somewhere where we have an issue, like right here. Now, if we select the cube, we do have options like fast Boolean, exact Boolean. What I find with this particular modifier is I find myself fiddling with the options pretty often, and it's hard to get something that works well. Sometimes it just doesn't work at all. Like for example, this was supposed to be a difference modifier. So I might have to come in here and do some things like subdivide, and even still, I might be running into some options or some issues. So let's just get rid of that and let's just try this destructive difference. And just like that, you could see destructively, it worked by default. Let's back up. Let's do a non-destructive difference. And again, this just worked better. I find it to work more consistently. Of course, you can still run into Boolean errors if you try hard enough. The Boolean operation is notorious for being difficult to work with because you're using, in a case like this, a complex high-density mesh relatively to a low-complex, low-density mesh. And so sometimes there are issues. But I will say, with Booltron, I find there to be far less issues. I like the shortcuts we have here. I like the option to bake, kind of a step in between destructive and non-destructive. And I like the fact that I can just quickly do a quick destructive operation, which is really nice. We also have union operation, intersect, slice. Oops, I need to select two objects here. Union, which unifies them, as you can see. Let's just go through the list here. Intersect, which will just include the geometry that was intersecting, that was overlapping. And then we have slice. As you can see, it just slices one object into another, keeping both of them. So very cool. Booltron, 10 out of 10. I have replaced my Boolean workflow with Booltron. It's free. It's an extension. Go ahead and grab it. Next on the list, edit preferences. We talked about Booltron. This one's a little bit more niche. This is camera plane, so we can open it up in the extension site here. And oftentimes just looking at the web page for the extension is enough to kind of get an idea. Now, the reason this is enabled is I had one particular project where this was a lifesaver. This is really useful if you're working with 2D graphics. So example, maybe you have like an Illustrator vector file where you have different layers of graphics, and you can bring them into Blender, automatically set them up with the camera plane, and have that depth effect with your camera. And the really cool thing about this is it actually accounts for the focal length of your camera as it changes, the position of your camera. It's just a really nice, quick and easy way to set up a lot of different image planes with a camera if you're going for that 2.5D effect where you're using 2D graphics in a 3D space. Now, this add-on's been around for quite a while, but it continues to be maintained. It's very, very useful, and I recommend it as an extension. I'm not going to get into this one. It's a little bit more niche, but hopefully that overview gives you an idea of that one. So let's collapse that one. And next, out of the gate, we're hitting pretty hard because this one is one of my all-time favorites. It's one of the GOATs. This one is Camera Shakify. Now, if you haven't seen me use this, I'm going to show you right now. Basically, it adds camera shake to your cameras, but the cool thing about it, it gives you a lot of controls, and the most important thing is it's not just procedurally generated shake with something like noise algorithms. What it is it's actually camera tracked data in different scenarios that you can apply as camera shake. So I think it's developed by Nathan. Let me see if I can get it. I don't want to get it wrong. It's Nathan Vagdal. I probably got it wrong. I'll put the text on screen when I find that. Also, Ian Hubert's involved with this production of this add-on. Very generous of them. Enough about that. Let's just add a cube here. Let's go to our camera. Let's jump inside of our camera. Let's play the view, the timeline, and let's start to add a camera Shakify. So, key things here. You can stack different shakes, which is very useful. We have our different shake types. So, investigation, close-up, the wedding. I think the names of these are kind of funny. The wedding I find to be like kind of standing and swaying, which I don't know if that's referring to like if you're standing at a wedding and you're super bored. Walk to store, self-explanatory. Handycam run, out car window, bike on gravel, spaceship shake, and the Zeke. Okay, so you don't have to just settle with any particular setting. Now, bike on gravel, for example, maybe you want this to be this shaky, maybe you want to dial it back. So you can actually work with the influence here. So let's put this at like 0.1. That's like a very high frequency shake there. Maybe you're in a spaceship going through space and you want some rattle. You can even set it lower to be less apparent. We could also up the scale. So this would, let's set this back to 0.1 and let's set the scale to something like 50. You could see how working with these two numbers together, you can start to get the effect that you're going for. You also have speed. So we could increase the speed or decrease the speed, which now it's not even noticeable. Let's have like 0.5. That's a little bit slower. And you could do a frame offset. This simply just moves the animation a specific number of frames, and that's if you want to kind of overlap or offset multiple animations that are maybe the same animation. Now, you can stack different shakes, which is really cool. So we're stacking our bike on gravel with the things we added to it with investigation. You can also, this is one of my favorite features, is you can keyframe any of these particular settings. So for example, maybe this one starts at 0. Just hit I to keyframe. Let's go to frame 70. Still 0, and by frame 90, the investigation shake is at 1. Now, if we play this back, you can see it's at 0, and it starts to increase, and now there's investigation. Where would this be useful? Well, I've done a lot of first-person animation in Blender. This is really useful. For example, if you started to sprint in your first-person animation, you could add some more camera shake on top of that to really sell the effect that you're running faster, you're starting to move. It's hard to pinpoint exactly and to tell you where you're going to use this, because honestly, you could use this all over the place. It's just an extremely useful extension for adding realism to your camera movements. Okay, the next one is called Commotion. We have it right here. If you go to the extensions page, you can read up on it a little bit more. This is another kind of niche one, particularly for motion graphics that I've had to do, and it just helps automate the process, and it's a quick way to get clients motion graphics that are beautiful. And let's just watch this. I think this video sums it up better than I could. As you can see, we have this animation on one of the spheres up here. It grows and then it changes colors. What you could do is select everything, copy the animation, and now the magical part is you can offset that animation. You can change the number or the amount of offset and the threshold for some randomness. And as you see there, now it's offsetting, so each sphere grows, as you can see, in turn. So they all grow. You can change these settings. You can sort by random, by cursor. He set it to random here, and now you can see they're kind of popping up at random times. So this is just a really useful add-on, essential if you're doing any kind of MoGraph work in Blender, and it just automates some of the process here. So I definitely recommend you grab that one if you're into MoGraphs. Let's move on to the next one. Copy attributes. This is an everyday workhorse. I just use this one all over the place. I've brought this up in tutorials before, but let me just see if I can show you an example of this. Let's say I had a surface here, and this is, let's say it's a screen, all right? And I have some details on the screen. Now it's oriented in a strange way in the scene. It's at a random location. Let's say that I had a light, and this area light I wanted to line up to project from this screen. Now, to do this manually, I would come into top view probably, and I would start to rotate this a bit. I might go to Control-Alt-Q view, and in each of these views, I would kind of try to get this to be rotated and lined up the place that I want it to be. Essentially, it's a nightmare. This is very difficult to do just by hand, and that's where we get the copy attribute menu. So what you do is you can copy attributes from one object to another. So in this case, we take the driven and then select the driver. Whatever is the active object is what you're going to be copying from. And now just hit Control C, and we get the copy attributes menu. You can just copy objects as normal, which you could do in Blender anyway. But then we get all these other options. We have copy location. If I do that, the light jumps to the surface of the cube, and we can copy rotation. Now, you might say, well, that's not oriented in the right direction. Well, it is oriented to the cube now. So now all we would have to do is rotate on our local x-axis. Let's see, it's rotate XX for the local X. And then in this case, it's -90 degrees. And there, now it's perfectly aligned to the surface of this screen that we have. All we would need to do is move it up on its local Z-axis, which is G for grab, Z for the global Z-axis, and then Z again for our local Z-axis. Now we could just move this out. And just like that, we have our light. We could just scale this up. And now we can have a light object emitting from the screen, which is really, really useful. So copy attributes, you could do more than what I said here. You can copy all sorts of stuff that you should go and look at. This is different from the Control-I menu, the Control-L menu for link or transfer data. There are just more options. You can copy more attributes. Very, very useful. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Okay, EdgeFlow, this is another modeling one, and I feel like their example here sums it up better than I can. So just look at this magic that's happening right here. We go to Set EdgeFlow, it automatically averages those edges out. You can have Set Linear, which is going to straighten your edges, and then check out the Set Curve. So it's just Edge, Set Curve, and then you can change the curvature of these edge loops that you have selected. So very, very powerful, a little bit niche, but honestly, once you understand what this does and you can start implementing it into your work, you're going to use it all over the place. It's amazing that this is free. Very, very well implemented into Blender. GrabDoc. This one's really great for streamlining your trim sheet workflow. So again, I feel like their video is nice and quick to sum up what it is. So as you see here, let me just jump back. As an example, they have this geometry detail here, which could be a trim sheet. It could be this tiling repeating pattern. Now, each of these could be textured with its own base color, roughness, normal, all of that good stuff. What we do is GrabDoc automatically sets up this automatic camera setup where it's going to bake out all of your maps for this particular trim sheet, base color, normal, roughness, metalness, whatever you want. It can utilize Eevee for baking or cycles, and I find both to be really efficient and really quick and good. Now, the really, really cool thing about this, not only do you get all of these controls and a quick way to bake out these trim sheets, but this connects directly with Marmoset toolbags. So you can actually build your geometry in Blender, send it off to Marmoset, bake your maps if you want to utilize Marmoset's superior baking algorithms or superior baking workflow. That's just the way it is. Blender can bake, but it's not as flexible as something like Marmoset. And then you can take those, bake them, and send them back to Blender and start using them as trim sheets. So this one, as soon as I realized this was a thing and started using it, it made my life just a lot easier. So this is definitely on my list. I've used it all over the place with my own custom textures, and I recommend it. Okay, this one, I mean, it's self-explanatory. Import Autodesk Max files. It saved me in some cases. The last thing you want to do is go buy an indie 3ds Max subscription just to import a file. or, you know, have to rely on a friend that has the software to import files and to work with them. So this one's just useful. Okay, this next one is called Light Helper. You can find it here. Let's just go to the page. I had it open here. Now, this is kind of borderline for me. I try not to include extensions that are already easy to pull off in vanilla Blender, but I find Blender light linking, even as I've used it, it still is a little bit confusing to me. It could use a better user interface for like, okay, which lights are linked to which objects. Sometimes it's the reverse of what I think is happening. So I decided to include this one. Basically, it's just a better interface for light linking. You can choose a light, you can add objects that light is influencing, or you can add a collection. It's just really straightforward. It's really easy. Does it add revolutionary functionality to Blender? No, but it makes existing functionality in Blender a lot easier to work with, and that's why I've included it. Okay, LoopTools, this is one we've brought up on the channel. I've showed you in previous videos. It doesn't have a preview on this page, but basically it's just a right-click modeling menu that gives you a lot of nice functionality. Let me just give you a classic example here. Let's add 5 cuts to each side here. Let's grab these faces and let's inset and delete those. Now, how would I turn this into a circle? Well, LoopTools, this is probably my most used function in LoopTools. They just have a circle function where you can change any shape into a circle. We could do the same thing right here. Go to LoopTools, go to circle, and there you go. So LoopTools, that's not the only tool that you have with it. You also have flatten and relax. Those are some other ones that I've used. But you know, you need to start modeling with this and you can start testing out where you could use it. But this is another one I find to be extremely useful. All right, let's keep going here. I'm trying to move fast enough to get through all of these. This next one is really cool, and it's been a pain point in Blender for a long time. So now we're talking about the lattice workflow in Blender. If you don't know what a lattice is, it's basically a low resolution. Let me try that again. It's a low resolution mesh placed on top of a high resolution mesh so you can make low resolution tweaks. That makes sense. Let me just show you what I'm talking about. Let's say we had to fit Suzanne into a box. I don't know if this is the best use case, but let's just pretend. And let's just inset this and extrude it down. So here's Suzanne, here's our box. And Suzanne's not really fitting into the box, so we need to add a lattice. Again, I don't know if this is the best use case, but let's just try it. So what we could do is we could hit Shift A, we could go to, let's go to lattice. We could move it over Suzanne. We can control our lattice's resolution. We go to Suzanne, we go to modifiers, we go to add modifier, we search for lattice, we choose the lattice object. Yikes, that is just a huge workflow for something that's very simple, especially if you're used to working in a software where it's just one button and it creates a lattice around the object. So that is where this comes in. Let me just apply the scale and rotation of everything to make sure we're good. With, with modal lattice resolution, all you need to do is press L. That's so easy. Select your object, press L for lattice, and just like that, it creates a lattice. Now, there are some other shortcuts. We can, I think, Control Scroll adds cuts this way, Alt Scroll this way. So let's do 2, 2, and then Shift Scroll, we'll do that way. So that's one way you could do it. That's not the way I do it. Let me just go back here. What I like to do is after you press L for lattice, all you need to do is simply press P for the panel. And just like that, we get our same lattice resolution options. We can add more. We can change the interpolation of these, and we can even specify a vertex group. And just like that, we can scale these down and see if we can fit Suzanne inside our box here. Let's just move both of them down. Kind of a weird use case, but we're already committed here. All right, there you go. Suzanne almost fits in the box. And this is, of course, just a lattice modifier. So once you're done, you can apply it. There you go. She fits in the box. Now, that is a heck of a lot easier than our other workflow. Remember, the other workflow was to Shift A. You could do cursor to selected, Shift A, add a lattice, go to Suzanne, add a modifier, search for lattice, select the lattice, scale the lattice to the right size. Oh, see, I'm not even getting it. Scale the lattice, add resolution in the lattice, and then and only then can you start to work with this. Alternative, hit L, hit P, select your number. As soon as you click out of this, it's done. It's an official lattice, and it already jumps into edit mode for you. This is a must-have. Whether you think you need lattices or not, the one time you need it, this is worth it just for one time. All right, so Modal lattice resolution, I definitely recommend it. All right, PolyQuilt retopology tool. I admit this isn't one I've tried yet. I just looked at it. I looked at the preview video, and it seemed very straightforward. A pain point in Blender for me has been retopology, especially if you've used something like Maya's retopology. And that's why I got this one, because I looked at it and immediately it looked like Maya's retopology, which I am so sad that I don't have anymore because I'm not using Maya. Now we do have like RetopFlow in Blender, which is a very robust topology system. My complaint with RetopFlow is it's like a whole different software. Yes, it works within Blender, but as soon as you launch RetopFlow, your shortcuts are different for a lot of cases. It launches into this different window in Blender, which is not Blender. You can't jump back and forth as easily between what you were doing. This particular tool, I haven't tried it yet. I haven't had the chance to do retopology since I've downloaded this. But PolyQuilt, just look at this. It looks like it has everything I would need. Typically, I don't need extreme retopology tools. I just need something to get away with my basic needs, and it has to work well. And I love the fact that it's just working quickly within Blender without launching this whole separate version of Blender. And, you know, like I was saying, that's the reason I don't necessarily like RetopFlow for casual retopology. All right. Moving on here, we have Quick Rigid. All right, so there are a few different tools that accomplish what Quick Rigid is doing. I've used a few in the past. I've even used a paid version. Quick Rigid, I find, let's just use our same scene here, to be pretty straightforward. Let me just go to front view. Let me duplicate some monkeys here, kind of move them around, and maybe go to top view, and let's grab just a few in the other direction as well. All right, so we have some monkeys. We want to drop them into this box. Let's apply a scale and rotation on everything. And to get to Quick Rigid, just go to your end panel, and it's down here. Now you need to select a mesh to make it a rigid body object. This is just utilizing Blender's default, internal rigid body system, but it's adding some functionality. So it's similar to our light linking tool, where all it was doing was making existing functionality a little bit more user-friendly, and that's all you need sometimes. So let's add passive to this particular object. We have all the rigid body options exposed in the panel right here. We can make this convex hole. Let's go ahead and make this mesh, and let's grab our monkeys here, actually just one monkey, add active, and all of these settings look fine. Let's copy everything else, select this one as the last one, and do copy from active. And now let's go to frame one. We could just play, and all of the monkeys fall into this cube. Now, sometimes when I'm doing rigid body, I'm not necessarily doing it to have, let me see if I can make this make sense. Sometimes when I'm doing rigid body, I'm not doing it to have a rigid body animation. I'm just set dressing or building a prop. So for example, I have a cube here that's full of Suzanne heads, and I don't want to place them individually in the box. I just want to drop them and have them kind of fall into each other in a way that works. That's what this add-on is great for, in my opinion. You could change your settings at a glance very quickly. We can bake to keyframes just like this. Now, what's useful about this is right now, if I go back to frame one, we're back just to having them how they were. We can bake this to keyframes, and all we need to do now, it's just going to take a second to think about that. We could come down to our timeline, select everything, and just delete those keyframes. Now, no matter what frame we're on, these are just set in place exactly where we want them. We could even take this another level, and let's just duplicate these a few times. Hopefully I don't crash my scene here. Let's select one of these. Let's add active, select all the other ones, copy from active, and let's simulate it all over again. Just hit play. There you go. We filled that. Let's go ahead and bake again. This time I'm only going to bake up to frame 122 where I am. Hit OK. It's going to think through that, crunch through the numbers, select every keyframe, delete the keyframes, and now I just need to delete a few of these that are falling out. And just like that, I've quickly filled a container with monkeys. I didn't have to place any of them manually. Yeah, that's how I use this particular add-on. It's also just great for quickly exposing your existing rigid body settings. It's just a good UI, what should already be in Blender in my opinion. But anyway, quick rigid body animations, very cool. Okay, Screencast Keys is the one that I keep forgetting to turn on, including in this video. This is great if you're teaching Blender like me. Just come over to Screencast Keys. The magic of this is it'll display every key that you press on the screen here. Now my monitor is 4K resolution, so that's absolutely tiny. So we can increase the font size, we can increase the mouse size, and now as I press buttons, you can see a history of what I'm clicking and everything. This works better than non-native screencast or non-native keyboard shortcut display software, like I think OBS has one, for example. The reason is this is specifically made for Blender, so it'll show you your mouse movements, your mouse clicks, all of that, and it'll show you your combination buttons as well, so like Shift plus Control, for example. It shows you those rather than showing them separately. So very, very useful. You can work with all sorts of display options here. This is one that I need to remember to turn on. I need to just turn it on in my default file and never forget it again, because I have people remind me sometimes I need to turn on Screencast Keys. So Screencast Keys, great for if you're teaching Blender. All right, we're getting through this. All right, Timelapse Orbit. This is my own add-on. Of course, I'm going to include it on the list. Now, something you should know about this is it is, as far as I know, not approved yet. Let me just take a look here. Let's go to Timelapse. Yeah, so it's not approved yet, but I submitted it. I'm releasing it under the general public license, and everyone can use it. What is Timelapse Orbit? It's kind of a niche tool. It's not for everyone, but it's also for people teaching Blender. I have a video that I'll link that goes into it in more depth. But basically, if we just come down here, let's find it. Timelapse Orbit, very simple. You have a orbit center. So usually you add an empty. So let me just add an empty to the scene. And let's just use that as the orbit center. And then you have a rate of rotation and you have a start button. So what does this do? Well, it rotates your viewport around wherever you've identified is the center of your focus. Why is this useful? Well, it's called Timelapse Orbit because it's intended to be used with time-lapse videos. What I do typically is I come up here to Window and I create a new window. In that new window, let me just stop the Timelapse Orbit in this one. Let's say I have my two monitors. In one monitor, this one is where I'm modeling everything. It's where I'm working. It's where I'm moving around my empty of focus. In my second monitor, I simply just have Timelapse Orbit opened up. Let's go to Timelapse Orbit. Let's move this empty down a bit. And in Timelapse Orbit, we could just start. And this will only rotate in this particular window. If I go back to the other window, I could just continue working in here, and hopefully you're starting to grasp what this could be used for. As I screen record this scene, as I'm working and modeling something or texturing something, I can create a nice time lapse that orbits around my work so that I can see the process of modeling and texturing in kind of an interesting way with a slow rotation around the object. Now, you can increase the rotation rate at any point if you want to quickly get to a spot you're talking about, and then you can decrease it down to almost nothing to really slow it down. And it's just very useful. I've had a lot of people use it for like social media. If they are focused on modeling, they don't want to put together a big production. They just want to focus on creating something. They can get Timelapse Orbit running. And then just like that, they have a video that they can post to social media to try to grow their engagement and their following. Yeah, I've had a lot of people use it and send me examples of how they've used it. That is how I use it, just to create time lapses. It's a custom tool. As soon as it's approved, it'll be available on Blender's extension library. We'll see if it gets approved. I submitted it on the weekend, so hopefully by the time you see this, it'll be up. What do you think of my list? Did I miss anything that is absolutely essential for you? Feel free to comment. Let me know if I missed something that's great for you. Yeah, I tried to keep it to tools that I actually practically see myself using, or that I do use all the time. I'm not a huge fan of tools that only do things slightly better than what Blender does by default. Some things I don't think there should be an add-on for. I'm more interested in the ones that I use every day that vastly change Blender, that really make the user interface far superior. So yeah, that's a look at some of my favorite, all-time favorite free Blender extensions, including the one that I recently added, Timelapse Orbit. You can hopefully, by the time this video comes out, go download that in the extension library. And yeah, thanks for checking this out. Make sure to head over to my Patreon, patreon.com/RileyB3D. You could support this channel. You can get access to exclusive tutorials and downloads. Yeah. Anyway, thanks again. Comment if I missed something, and I'll see you in the next video.